Why Pierre Poilievre should not win the Canadian election by Stephanie Larocque, April 14th. 2025 Canada stands at a crossroads as it approaches the next federal election. The rise of Pierre Poilievre, a firebrand conservative leader known for his populist broadsides and willingness to bend constitutional norms, has stirred intense debate. Supporters applaud his promises to shake up Ottawa's status quo. Critics warn he would undermine the very foundations of Canadian democracy. Pierre Poilievre should not become Prime Minister, and the reasons are as stark as they are troubling. From openly vowing to override civil liberties using the Constitution's notwithstanding clause, to echoing the divisive playbook of Donald Trump, to drawing apparent favor from authoritarian actors abroad, Poilievre's brand of politics poses risks Canada cannot afford. This article lays out the case against a Poilievre victory, grounded in his own words, policy positions, and the global implications of his rise, and why Canadians should be deeply concerned about the direction he would take the country. Willingness to trample rights. The notwithstanding clause threat, one of the most alarming indicators of Poilievre's approach to governance, is his eagerness to invoke the notwithstanding clause of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, a rare constitutional override that allows governments to pass laws notwithstanding certain protected rights. Poilievre has made it crystal clear that, if elected, he would not hesitate to use this power. In fact, he boasted to a police association earlier this year that a future Poilievre government would ensure his tough-on-crime policies are implemented, using whatever tools the Constitution allows me to use, a thinly veiled reference to deploying Section 33, the Charter's override provision. No federal government in Canadian history has ever invoked the notwithstanding clause. It is meant to be a last resort measure, precisely because using it means suspending Canadians' fundamental rights, such as freedom of expression or equality, in order to push a law through. Yet, Poilievre is promising to do exactly that. At a campaign stop in Montreal, he announced plans to introduce a law reinstating consecutive life sentences for heinous murderers, and explicitly said he would invoke the clause to insulate this law from charter challenges. A conservative government will reintroduce and pass the law and empower judges to impose consecutive sentences for killers. He declared, adding that he respects the court and charter, but would use the notwithstanding clause to fight crime. In other words, Poilievre is prepared to override charter rights to enact his agenda, something no prime minister has ever done in Canada. Legal experts and observers have reacted with dismay at Poilievre's cavalier stance. Michael Spratt, a prominent criminal lawyer, noted that Poilievre all but promised to use the notwithstanding clause to bulldoze through legislation that would otherwise violate the Charter. Poilievre even put it bluntly, "All of my proposals are constitutional, and we will make them constitutional using whatever tools the Constitution allows," he told an audience of police, making no secret that bending constitutional norms is on the table. This approach is unprecedented and dangerous. Invoking the notwithstanding clause is essentially an admission that your law violates rights, as Spratt points out, calling Poilievre's pride in this fact disturbing. It signals a willingness to suspend Canadians' freedoms whenever convenient. Once that line is crossed, where does it stop? Spratt warns that this kind of divisive populism thrives on undermining democratic institutions and opens the door wide for authoritarian abuses of civil liberties. Moreover, Poilievre's rivals across the political spectrum, from liberals to New Democrats to Quebec nationalists, rarely agree on much, but they are united in condemning his stance on the notwithstanding clause. Liberal leader and former central banker Mark Carney blasted Poilievre's promise as very dangerous, arguing that a prime minister's job is to defend the charter, not gut it, and that politicizing fundamental rights is a slippery slope leading to ever more erosions. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh concurred that using the clause undermines the charter and should not be done. Even Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet, whose province has controversially used the clause, cautioned that while it may be legal, a would-be prime minister should avoid such overrides and work within the justice system rather than exempting himself from it. The consensus is clear. Poilievre's readiness to trample charter rights represents a profound threat to civil liberties and the checks and balances of Canadian democracy. Echoes of Trump, populist rhetoric and political style beyond policy specifics. It is Poilievre's political style and rhetoric that draw the most striking comparisons to U.S. President Donald Trump. Poilievre has fashioned himself as a populist outsider storming the gates of the Laurentian elite, eager to take back control for ordinary people. In doing so, he has employed a combative, anti-establishment approach uncannily similar to Trump's, albeit delivered in a Canadian register. Observers have directly linked Poilievre to Trump, noting that his pugnacious communications strategy practically invites the comparison. With some Canadian-specific twists, Poilievre's broad strategy is reminiscent of Donald Trump's brash, unyielding attacks on institutions like the mainstream media. Indeed, attacking the media and elites is central to Poilievre's playbook, just as it was to Trump's. Poilievre has made a public enemy out of the CBC, Canada's public broadcaster, claiming it peddles liberal propaganda. In a headline-grabbing move in 2023, he even appealed directly to Twitter owner Elon Musk to label the CBC as government-funded media, a tag Musk promptly applied. Poilievre triumphantly announced the label as CBC officially exposed as government-funded media. Now people know that it is Trudeau propaganda, not news, urging followers to defund the CBC. The stunt was pure Trumpian theater, using social media virality to undermine a critical media outlet's credibility and energize an anti-establishment base. It exemplified Poilievre's media strategy. Play offense, don't back down, communicate directly to your audience, and produce viral hits. Like Trump, Poilievre casts the independent press as a villain, thereby deflecting scrutiny and rallying supporters who are told not to trust anyone but him. Poilievre's encounters with journalists have become legendary among his followers for their confrontational flair. In one widely viewed clip, Poilievre responded to a reporter's question about similarities to Trump by slowly munching on an apple and methodically dismantling the premise of the question. When the reporter suggested, a lot of people say Poilievre is following the Donald Trump book, Poilievre coolly demanded, "Really? Which people?" As the interviewer faltered, Poilievre smirked. "Some people say," mocking the notion without ever substantively addressing it. The exchange, which his team proudly posted unedited to social media, served as red meat for his base, portraying Poilievre as a triumphant warrior against a flustered mainstream media. It's a page straight from Trump's playbook. Openly ridicule the press, dominate the narrative, and refuse to ever admit fault or similarity to anyone else. Analysts note that the tone and language Poilievre uses are strikingly Trump-like in their aggression. The kind of aggressive personal language that Trump uses is the kind of language and tone that Poilievre uses as well, observes Professor Greg Elmer, who studies political communications in Canada. Poilievre's speeches are rife with references to corrupt gatekeepers and a broken Canada, rhetoric of anger and decline mirroring Trump's dystopian American carnage imagery. He relentlessly blasts Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and elite institutions with unyielding contempt. For a while, this approach seemed to work. Poilievre dominated headlines and social feeds, even winning praise from far-right influencers abroad who recognized a kindred spirit. But as Donald Trump reemerged in U.S. politics, recently Canadians have recoiled. Poilievre suddenly began sprinting away from any MAGA associations when he saw his poll numbers slip. Yet, aside from some policy distancing, he has held fast to the same confrontational, populist style that brought him this far. The parallels to Trump in style and strategy remain unmistakable and deeply divisive. Hard-right agenda. Policy parallels on key issues, style aside. What about Poilievre's stances on substantive issues? Here, too, there are telling parallels to Trump, as well as critical differences that highlight different shades of right-wing populism. Poilievre bills himself as a common-sense, conservative fighting for the little guy. In practice, his platform mixes Trump-style populist promises with the traditional hard-right policy wish list. Consider law and order. Much like Trump's tough-on-crime mantra, which often trumped legal constraints, Poilievre has made punitive justice reforms a pillar of his campaign, even if it means appending constitutional safeguards. His pledge to mandate consecutive prison sentences for violent offenders, overruling the Supreme Court's 2022 decision, and to eliminate parole opportunities for certain criminals resonates with Trumpian rhetoric about being tough to the extreme. Poilievre frames it as putting victims first, but the means, invoking the notwithstanding clause to push these laws through, reveal an agenda that would bulldoze civil rights in the name of punishment. This is eerily reminiscent of Trump's attitude that virtually any tactic is justified to appear tough, whether it's attacking judicial independence or encouraging police to get rough with suspects. Canadian legal commentators have rightly raised alarm that Poilievre's approach would trample fundamental justice and make the charter a casualty of partisan politics. On the economic front, Poilievre preaches a populist rage against elites while pushing policies that echo the right-wing orthodoxy of tax cuts and deregulation. He rails against inflation and high taxes, much as Trump did, promising to axe the carbon tax and fire the central bank governor for causing inflation. During his leadership bid, Poilievre took the unprecedented step of threatening to fire Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem, a move that stunned economists who value the bank's independence. This rhetoric of blaming a gatekeeper for economic pain is pure populism, similar to Trump's attacks on the U.S. Federal Reserve and appeals to blue-collar frustration. Both men stoke the idea of a rigged system. Trump spoke of a deep state undermining prosperity. Poilievre decries faceless gatekeepers blocking the young from home ownership and the working class from getting ahead. The emotional chord is the same, even if Poilievre wraps it in Canadian specifics like housing policy and central banking. On climate and energy, Poilievre lines up closely with Trump's fossil fuel fervor. He has promised to repeal federal carbon pricing, calling it a crippling tax on working people, and to unleash oil and gas development. Poilievre derides many climate measures as virtue signaling and emphasizes pipeline building and domestic energy production. This mirrors Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and his dismissals of climate science in favor of drill, baby, drill. A Poilievre government would likely roll back Canada's climate commitments, much to the glee of the oil lobby, just as the Trump administration gutted environmental protections. For voters who prioritize action on climate change, this is a glaring red flag. Poilievre's victory could set back Canada's climate policy by decades, aligning Ottawa with the same retrograde stance Trump took in Washington. Even on immigration and diversity, where Poilievre is arguably more cautious than Trump, there are signals of a hard right shift. Poilievre has said the Conservative Party is pro-immigration, and he courts immigrant communities, a notable difference from Trump's overt nativism. Yet, he also amplifies culture war grievances and has associated with figures hostile to immigration and multiculturalism. One controversy involved his YouTube channel tagging a misogynistic anti-feminist slogan to attract viewers in the manosphere, overlapping with alt-right audiences. While Poilievre himself stopped short of Trump's xenophobic flare-ups, no talk of border walls or Muslim bans, the populist undercurrent is similar, and us versus the narrative skepticism of global institutions like the World Economic Forum, and vows to put Canadians first in every policy. He is, as one analyst put it, the kind of politician some Republicans wish Trump was: a tame populist, one who channels popular anger, but without Trump's most extreme anti-immigrant policies. Yet this tamer facade should not fool anyone. Poilievre's populism may be delivered with a Canadian politeness, but it still thrives on division and resentment. The substance of his platform, anti-tax, anti-regulation, anti-media, anti-elite, is very much in sync with the Trumpian New Right. Signals from Moscow. The Putin connection, perhaps most unnerving, are the subtle rumblings of approval for Poilievre from Russian-aligned sources, raising questions about what a Poilievre victory would mean on the world stage. It's no secret that authoritarian regimes like Vladimir Putin's Russia favor Western leaders who sow chaos, division, or isolationism in their own countries. Donald Trump famously earned Kremlin praise and interference on his behalf for his disruptive impact on U.S. politics. Now there are indications, albeit indirect, that Moscow's propagandists see promise in Poilievre as well. For one, Russian state media and proxy networks have shown an unusual interest in Canadian politics, often in ways that align with conservative talking points. A U.S. Justice Department indictment in 2024 exposed a covert Russian disinformation campaign that funneled $10 million into a Tennessee-based far-right media outlet run by two Canadians. This outlet, called Tenet Media, produced thousands of propaganda videos, including over 50 videos focused on Canadian politics in 2023 to 24. Researchers found these Kremlin-funded videos heavily featured Justin Trudeau and other hot-button issues in Canadian discourse, clearly aiming to amplify domestic divisions in Canada. In practice, that meant churning out content attacking the Liberal government on issues like pandemic mandates, cultural controversies, and allegations of government wrongdoing. Such messaging, not coincidentally, dovetails with themes Poilievre hammers on: government overreach, freedom, protests, and scandals tarnishing Trudeau. While no evidence has emerged linking Poilievre or his party to these Russian operations, and Poilievre himself has condemned Putin's tyranny and voiced support for Ukraine's fight, the net effect of Moscow's interference was to boost the narrative that Canada needs a new conservative government. When foreign actors push disinformation that benefits one side of an election, we should all be wary. The Kremlin clearly believes a polarizing figure like Poilievre in power would serve Russia's interest in a weaker, more divided Western alliance. Even Russian official media have seized opportunities to leverage Poilievre's actions for their propaganda. When Canada was rocked by the scandal of a Ukrainian former Nazi being inadvertently honored in Parliament last fall, Poilievre vociferously and rightly demanded an apology from Trudeau. But Russian state outlets amplified this episode ad nauseum. Moscow delighted in painting Canada as sympathetic to Nazis to bolster its false justification for the Ukraine invasion. In one Sputnik broadcast, Poilievre's demand for Trudeau's apology was spotlighted prominently, with the story noting how Canada's opposition leader was outraged at the honoring of a Ukrainian Nazi veteran. The underlying signal was clear. Even Canada's would-be next leader condemns Trudeau's Ukraine policy, feeding the Kremlin narrative that Western support for Ukraine is morally compromised. Poilievre surely did not intend to aid Russian information warfare. His goal was domestic political gain. But the incident shows how his combative style can be weaponized by foreign adversaries. A leader who constantly denounces his own government as corrupt or illegitimate, as Poilievre often does regarding liberals, inadvertently lends credence to hostile powers portraying democracy as broken. There are also policy stances of Poilievre's that must give U.S. and NATO allies pause. Notably, Poilievre's Conservatives were the only major Canadian party to vote against a 2023 update to Canada's free trade agreement with Ukraine, a pact intended as a strong show of solidarity with a nation under Russian attack. The trade update mainly expanded tariff-free access and investment. Hardly controversial. But Poilievre's caucus opposed it, bizarrely claiming it imposed a carbon tax on Ukraine. The Ukrainian embassy itself refuted this claim as nonsense. The Tories seized the moment to score domestic points against carbon pricing, but at the cost of breaking bipartisan unity on support for Ukraine. Such moves suggest a Poilievre government might put narrow agendas above the principled stand against Putin's aggression. Indeed, public opinion research shows that sympathy for Ukraine's cause, while still strong in Canada overall, has waned significantly among Poilievre's conservative base. Only in those ranks is skepticism of aiding Ukraine approaching a majority view. This trend mirrors the Trumpist isolationism taking hold in U.S. Republican circles. If Poilievre must cater to a base increasingly lukewarm on supporting Ukraine, Canada's steadfast position against Putin could soften. That prospect undoubtedly pleases the Kremlin, which would welcome any fracture in the united front against its military adventurism. To be clear, Pierre Poilievre is not a Russian stooge. He has publicly stood with Ukraine and condemned Putin. But that is precisely what makes the signals from Moscow so concerning. Even as Poilievre professes Western democratic values, his rise is cheered quietly by those who seek to undermine those values. Authoritarian leaders like Putin know that populists who rage against their own institutions can unintentionally do their work for them. A Poilievre government, by picking fights with courts, the media, central bankers, and global partners, could weaken Canada from within, a strategic win for foreign adversaries. Canadian voters should ask themselves why Kremlin propagandists, hard-right U.S. influencers, and even Elon Musk, now a vocal Trump ally, have all shown enthusiasm for Poilievre's attacks on the Canadian establishment. If the champions of a liberalism abroad are eagerly anticipating a Poilievre victory, that alone is a red flag about what path he would lead Canada down. Conclusion: preserving Canadian democracy in a healthy democracy, change in government can be reinvigorating, but not all change is for the better. Pierre Poilievre offers a brand of change that Canada may not survive intact. His appeal rests on real grievances: affordability woes, distrust in institutions, anger at scandals. But his solutions and style threaten to do more harm than good. A leader willing to sacrifice civil liberties at the altar of expediency, who mimics the divisive populism of Donald Trump, and who is embraced by liberal forces outside our borders, is not the leader Canada needs. The dangers are not abstract. They can be measured in rights overridden, social fabric torn by division, and international credibility eroded. Canadians have always valued peace, order, and good government, a steadiness built on respect for the Charter, for pluralism, and for facts. Poilievre's approach runs roughshod over these values. His slogan might as well be "Make Canada Angry Again." But our nation does not need anger. It needs leadership that unites, solutions grounded in evidence, and a prime minister who strengthens our democratic norms rather than shredding them. Pierre Poilievre has shown us in his own words and actions exactly what kind of leader he would be. It's a risk we cannot afford to take. In the voting booth, Canadians must remember what is at stake. A vote against Poilievre is not a vote for the status quo, but a vote in defense of our charter rights, our civil discourse, and our country's standing as a vibrant democracy. The best way to uphold Canadian values, freedom, equality, justice, is to ensure that Pierre Poilievre does not win the next election. Our future as an open and democratic society may depend on it. Sources: 1. Canadian Press, Poilievre's pledge to use notwithstanding Clause 2. Global News, Poilievre on overriding charter for sentencing law. Reactions by Carney Singh. 3. Canadian Lawyer, opinion on Poilievre's charter threats. 4. Politico, comparison of Poilievre's media strategy to Trump's populist rhetoric and polling. Shift. 5. Press Progress, Russian covert funding of far-right Canadian content.